welcome to the first video on this channel. Okay, so first I'm gonna put you over there. First, we are reacting to what happened when death row inmates survived execution. Let's go.
May 3rd, 1946, convict Willie Francis felt 2,000 volts of electric current surging through his body during his execution by an electric chair. Miraculously, he survived, but what happened next will leave you in disbelief. He heard,
If you have that much volts going through your body, I swear you die like straight away, or like in a few minutes. What is this?
10 stories of convicts who, against all odds, survived their own executions, and the shocking details of what happened afterward. Number 10. Kenneth Smith.
Court documents say convicted killer Kenneth Smith remained strapped to a gurney for hours. Attorneys say that he was repeatedly jabbed with needles in his arms and hands.
November 17th, 2022. An American murderer, Kenneth Smith, was taken
Well, he looks like a serial killer, mate.
to the death chamber for execution. Despite a clear order from one of the country's highest courts to pause the process, Smith was a hired killer back in the 80s and was contracted by a preacher, Charles Sennett Sr., to murder his wife, Elizabeth.
You're hiring a murderer to kill your own wife. What did she do? Did she
Sennett.
not make you a sandwich or something?
Mr. Charles was in huge debt at the time and decided to kill his wife in a bid to collect life insurance. He paid Smith and another man, John Forrest Parker, $1,000 each to get that job done.
See him, you see him, you see this. That's just, no, that's just yuck. I don't need to get anything. He just looks weird. He looks like he would like kill minors. Ow, my fingers is clipped. Okay, now it's going to take long today.
However, things didn't go as planned, resulting in Smith's capture and sentencing to death. Smith spent 33 years on death row before a date was fixed for his execution. But during his execution, the three-man team in charge of injecting his vein with lethal drugs couldn't find an IV line to do so. They pierced his arm multiple times while he shouted and cried out for them to stop. At one point, they even stabbed his muscle, leaving him in more pain. In his own words, Smith said,
"When no workable veins could be found, they instructed the prison guards to flip the gurney backwards so that my feet pointed towards the ceiling while my head bowed to the ground, like an inverted crucifixion. Their face masks were covered in my blood, and they finally stabbed my collarbone."
They did this in an attempt to begin a central line IV in the subclavian artery. After 4 hours of tirelessly trying to inject this guy, they finally returned him to his cell, obeying the initial court order to pause his execution. Now, his lawyers described what he went through as a disturbing and traumatizing experience, which I think everyone would agree to. But as traumatizing as that experience was, it's about to get a lot worse for Smith, as the U.S. has derived a new way to kill him, with the use of nitrogen. August 26, 2023, the state of Alabama had decided to put Smith to death using nitrogen hypoxia. Now, this method of execution has never been used before, but Smith has cheated death so many times that they believe this is the only way to put him out. All that's needed is for him to inhale that gas and find his way to the afterlife. So, can he escape the clutches of death this time? I don't think so. Number 9. Ramel
If
Broom.
I go back,
September
wait,
15th, 2009.
if I go back, yeah. Why does this guy look like Eminem?
At this time,
Okay.
Mel Broom. September 15th, 2009. Convicted murderer and rapist Ramel Broom was to be executed by lethal injection in the state of Ohio. However,
of course it's in Ohio, isn't it?
Executioners encountered certain problems that made it impossible to execute Mr. Broom on that day. June 4th, 1956, marked the birth of Ramel in Muskegon, Michigan, before moving out to Ohio at the age of 5 with his mom. On getting to Ohio, Broom mingled with a few bad acquaintances that changed the course of his life forever. His earliest known crime came in 1974, when he robbed people of their cars on highways. Then he took it a step further, when he began sexually abusing women and killing
My ears are hurting. My brain's hurting.
them in some instances. However, the one case that earned him the death penalty was the abduction, rape, and murder of a girl named
That ain't real. What's in it? What's in it? What are you? What? Oh. Let's read. One more broom. Don't care. June 49, December 28, 2020, with an American death for inmate. He was convicted of murder, murder, kidnapping, and rape. He was sentenced to death for the 1,980 for murder of a 14-year-old Trina Middleton. Boom. It's scheduled to be executed on September 15th, but after failed to locate a vein, he was gone. Oh, you know what? I can't. Okay.
Trina Middleton. Broom abducted her as she walked home with two of her friends from a football game in East Cleveland, Ohio. He was arrested after a DNA test proved it.
You see, wait, you see this? You see him and her, yeah? I've seen this. I think he was like swerving in the road, yeah? And then I think you see this young lady, yeah? The cops pulled him over, and then his belt was unzipped and everything, and I think she was doing the got on him.
Football game in East Cleveland, Ohio. He was arrested after a DNA test proved his involvement in the crime. He was found guilty and sentenced to death by lethal injection, but ironically, that marked the beginning of his journey. 2 hours into this execution, they couldn't locate an IV line for administering the lethal drugs. In the process, Broom suffered excruciating pain from the numerous penetrations made into his arm. The Ohio government then intervened and called off the execution. It was postponed by a week, but that postponement turned into years as his lawyers tried fighting for an appeal. Broom even wrote a book about his disturbing experience that day. And after surviving his 2009 execution, Broom was eventually rescheduled to be executed on March 16, 2022. But on December 20th, 2020, Ramel Broom died of COVID-19 complications. While he eventually passed away on death row, it's safe to say Broom cheated death in some way and lived longer than the government wanted.
He died from COVID. Well, at least you didn't get whatever you were gonna get.
Number 8. William Duell. There's a reason why executions by hanging went obsolete, and that reason is because a lot of people had survived it in the past, including this guy named William Duell. Duell was a minor when
He looks like a pedo.
was convicted of being an accessory to the rape of Sarah Griffin in Acton, England. November 24th, 1740. Duell was hanged in Tyburn, along with 4 others. His body hung for about 20 minutes, and after he was believed to have been dead, he was cut down and taken to an anatomy theater for dissection. However, after his clothes were stripped and laid on the board, one of the servants noticed that he had begun breathing slowly. Duell's breath
You've been hanging off a rope with nothing for 20 minutes. How are you alive? Man's like,
got quicker and quicker, and in a few hours he was able to sit upright and speak. Unfortunately for him, the medical servants reported back to the authorities, and Duell was taken back to prison that night. It was later discovered that due to the pressing of the noose around his neck, he suffered delirium and couldn't recollect his anger.
Sudden waking and wanting only thinking language, halo, mood and personality.
By the following day, he was back to full health. Meanwhile, the public had apparently found out what happened.
How is this guy back in full health?
And they were happy for him. He was later pardoned on the basis of his mental state, and his sentence was commuted to penal transportation. This meant that he was exiled to North America, living the rest of his life in Boston, and was reported to have died sometime around 1805.
How did he die?
Number 7. John Lee. February 23rd, 1885. 3 attempts were made to execute Lee by hanging, and they all failed. August 15th.
3 of them failed. 3! No, that's mental.
1864. John Lee was born in England. At the age of 21, he was convicted for the murder of his employer, Emma Keyes, at her home. The only substantial evidence his prosecutors had against him was the fact that he was the only male in the house at the time of her murder, along with his former criminal records and some cuts on his arm. However, Lee claimed that he was innocent of the crime. Regardless, he was sentenced to death by hanging, but it failed.
Yeah, but how is he surviving with 3?
On that said day, John was taken to the stand, his head fastened around the noose, and a sack was put over his head. As the executioner pulled the lever for the
I thought they just hang you. Didn't know they put something over your head.
trapdoor to open, it failed. He tried a bunch of times, but it didn't work. It was really a huge embarrassment for everyone involved, and the medical examiner stepped in to call it off. Lee was taken back to his cell while the mechanism was being tested. It worked great during testing. But once Lee stood on top,
The other one to die.
that trapdoor refused to drop. Throughout the whole time, Lee remained calm, saying,
His faith in the Lord would save him.
So, what exactly happened next? Well, a judge eventually commuted the sentence to life imprisonment, but after numerous appeals and more evidence from the case showing he might have not been the only male in the house the night of the murder, Lee was found to be innocent. So maybe he truly had some divine intervention that day. It is a mystery. But another mystery that hasn't been unfolded is what exactly happened to Lee.
What happened to me? Got an ad.
Crazy sounds in here.
Lee after he was released in 1907. Some accounts say he eventually died in the Tavistock workhouse sometime during the Second World War, while others claim he moved to the U.S. to become a lecturer and died in Milwaukee back in 2009. Regardless of which account gives the real details of his life, John Lee will always be known as the man they couldn't hang.
That's the way to put it, isn't it?
Number 6. Anne Green. December 14th, 1650, an English domestic servant named Anne Green was executed by hanging for infanticide.
What?
The intentional killing of an infant. Now, this happened a really long time ago, and Anne's story has been told for ages due to its peculiarity and uniqueness. Born in the year 1628, Anne worked as a scullery maid in the house of Sir Thomas Reed, a justice of peace who lived in Oxfordshire, England. However, Anne...
Hold on, my dog wants to come in.
was seduced by Sir Thomas's grandson, Geoffrey Reed, who got her pregnant in the process. And after 17 weeks, she suffered a miscarriage.
Oh.
At this point, Anne tried concealing the remains of the fetus, but it was later seen and she was accused of infanticide. She was sentenced to death by hanging. However, her story took an interesting twist from this point on. Anne was hanged at the famous Oxford Castle for 30 minutes. And when it was believed that she was dead, her body was taken down, placed in a coffin, and given to physicians at the University of Oxford for dissection.
Pat's still there.
All this time, Anne was not dead. She was alive, without food, water, and limited air for 24 hours. Before one of the
In a coffin.
physicians attempted to dissect her body and found that she had a pulse. Just try to picture the shock on his face as Anne's body moved. So he and a couple of other physicians administered drugs to Anne for a couple of hours before she could finally speak and move her limbs. 3 days after her execution, Sir Thomas died, leaving no one in charge to object to her pardon. However, like we see in typical prehistoric movies, a group of men started a riot claiming she should be re-executed. But no one let them, and Anne was asked to leave the town a free person. This is another case where people believe she had a divine intervention for her innocence. But at the end of the day, she lived a happy life, got married, had 3 children, and died in 1659. Number 5. Willie Francis. Now, we've seen people survive the lethal injection, but an electric chair? That kind of sounds impossible. However, a certain African-American named Willie Francis survived an execution by electric chair back in 1946. Now, 2 years before that, a pharmacist in St. Martinville, Louisiana, named Andrew Thomas was shot and killed. Allegedly, Andrew abused boys within the area sexually and killed.
A priest was shot.
Allegedly, Andrew
Abused boys.
boys within the area sexually,
Right.
leading many to believe Francis was one of his victims. His murder remained unsolved for 9 months. But in August 1945, Willie was detained as the main suspect in the murder. The police claimed that Francis was carrying Thomas's wallet, but no evidence of this claim was submitted during the trial. Adding to that, the gun and bullet that was used to commit the murder matched that of the deputy sheriff in St. Martinville, Auguste Fuselier. So now where exactly does Francis come in? Well, he doesn't. There was no concrete evidence to prove he committed this murder, apart from 2 written confessions that he was probably coerced into writing. Now, during his trial, the court-appointed defense attorneys offered no objections, called no witnesses, and just didn't put up a defense to prove his innocence. 2 days after his trial began, he was found guilty by 12 white jurors, and the judge sentenced Francis to death, despite being a minor. May 3rd, 1946. Francis had survived the electric chair.
How? How do you survive the electric chair? Don't they put it on your head?
Apparently, the portable chair was found to have been improperly set up by an intoxicated prison guard, given the reason why Francis survived it. So, what happened next? An attorney named Bertrand de Blanc took up Willie's case and tried persuading the Supreme Court to overturn his sentence. He even brought up a few new facts to the case that would vindicate Francis. For example, the gun, bullets, and the body of Andrew Thomas went missing a few days before the trial began. There was definitely something fishy going on, and Francis was being framed. But the U.S. Supreme Court rejected that appeal. May 9th, 1947, Francis was returned to the electric chair where he died. Before his death, his last words to a reporter were,
I'm going to meet the Lord with my Sunday pants and Sunday heart.
Looking back on
That's nice.
this case, it is totally mind-blowing to imagine thousands of volts passing through Francis's
1,000 volts going through your body and you survive.
body and him surviving. It's very rare to see.
It's very
Number 4. Alan
special.
Eugene Miller. At this point, maybe the state of Alabama should be banned from executing convicts by lethal injection because they're never getting it right. And in the case of Alan Miller, they almost killed him, but not by lethal drugs, but by the series of injection wounds inflicted all over his body. September 22nd, 2022, Alan was scheduled to be executed by lethal injection for the murder of 3 people: Lee Holdbrooks, Christopher Scott Yancey, and Terry Jarvis.
He just killed every man.
During a delusional episode in 1999.
Great.
However, on the set day, the executioners encountered a series of problems. They couldn't identify an IV line to gain access to his veins. They repeatedly pushed needles into his arms, hands, and feet. And after about an hour and 30 minutes of not finding the needed line, the executioners began mercilessly puncturing his flesh with the hopes of finding a vein. Alan sat and felt every puncture and piercing through his flesh.
Ah. If you were there and you're seeing this, yeah, would you be sick? I would. How much screams do you think he had?
After almost 2 hours, the executioners aligned a strap over his chest and aligned the gurney in a vertical position, with his hands and feet bleeding. They then evacuated the execution chamber, leaving Miller to die. However, after about 30 minutes, Miller was brought down from that gurney, stitched up, and taken to his cell. He had survived his execution.
How?
So, what's next for Alan Miller? Well, as of now, his lawyers are fighting for his execution method to be changed, given the fact that the state of Alabama has proven itself incapable of executing convicts by injection. Miller's case marked the third in 4 years that the state has botched. Another reason they're fighting for this new method is because he cannot possibly go through the trauma and pain he felt the last time. At the end of the day, at the end of it all, Alan Eugene Miller is among the few death row survivors still alive to this day.
Need this help? 1 year ago. So he might still be alive.
Number 3, John Smith.
He looks like a historian.
If there was a record held that the most executions survived by a single person, it would belong to none other than John Smith. Born in the year 1661, Smith was a housebreaker and petty thief in London. Before he chose that life, though, Smith served in the Navy as a merchantman, and then in man of war. He was discharged after the famous Battle of Vigo Bay, but soon after that he enlisted as a soldier, where he mingled with a few bad acquaintances that ultimately led him down the path of crime. December 5th, 1705, John was found guilty of 2 indictments and was sentenced to death. At first, he really didn't seem bothered until it was time for him to be hanged.
Oh.
However, during the entire process, his family members caused an uproar. They tried all they could to reduce the suffering Smith was facing, but after hanging for about 15 minutes without dying, he was put down and taken to a house nearby so he could recover. February 20th, 1706, John was granted parole for the traumatizing experience he had.
I didn't even mean to stop on that. So he was up there for 15 minutes, Jay. Why was he taken down? He's look at this mug.
During his execution. However, this was the point things got really interesting. Following his release, John reverted to his former habits of housebreaking. He found himself apprehended for a second time. Yet, due to his recent conviction for the same offense less than 6 months earlier, and the complexity surrounding his case, he ultimately walked away without facing further punishment. But he showed he didn't deserve the mercy shown to him after he was arrested the 3rd time for housebreaking. At this point, it became clear Smith needed to be executed. But the day before his trial, the prosecutor died, setting him free once again. People with such luck are rare to come by. And the crazy thing was, his days of being lucky were far from over. May 17th, 1727, 66-year-old John Smith was found stealing a padlock with a friend. His friend managed to escape, but Smith was held down and turned over to the authorities. It was discovered that Smith was trying to break into a warehouse, and it earned him his 3rd conviction. He was sentenced
Didn't he get... That's like the 4th criminal record.
to penal transportation in Virginia, U.S. Smith pleaded for physical punishment, but the Lord Mayor rejected that appeal. Eventually,
This guy's so lucky, honestly.
he would be sent away from the city, leaving behind his entire family. No one knows for sure what happened to Smith afterwards, but we hope his luck followed him. Number 2, Joseph Samuel. In 1795, a German man named Joseph Samuel was convicted and sentenced to penal transportation in England. However, Joseph did one of the most unthinkable things that led him straight to that death penalty. But fate had other plans for him. Now, at the time, Britain had a penal settlement in Sydney, so Samuel and a few other convicts managed to escape that settlement back to England.
Disappear from social media and do this instead. Be richer than your friends
weapons, mastering AI tools, spending only.
Okay.
After their escape, they robbed the home of a wealthy woman, and in the process, murdered the police officer guarding her home.
Oh.
Of a wealthy woman, and in the process, murdered the police officer guarding her home. Being that the woman was wealthy and an officer had been killed, the authorities hunted down and captured Samuel and the gang. During his trial, the woman specifically identified Samuel as a culprit. He confessed to the robbery but denied killing the officer. However, since he was the only one the woman identified, he was sentenced to death by hanging. All the others were released due to lack of evidence.
When did we go in?
September.
Hold up.
His entire family. No one knows for sure what happened to Smith afterwards, but we hope his luck followed him. Number 2, Joseph Samuel.
Oh yeah.
That led him straight to that penal settlement in Sydney. So Samuel and a few other convicts managed to escape that settlement back to England.
Am I there? Yes, I am.
After their
England, United Kingdom. Oh.
escape, they robbed the home of a wealthy woman, and in the process, murdered the police officer guarding her home. Being that the woman was wealthy and an officer had been killed, the authorities hunted down and captured Samuel and the gang. During his trial, the woman specifically identified Samuel as a culprit. He confessed to the robbery but denied killing the officer. However, since he was the only one the woman identified, he was sentenced to death by hanging. All the others were released due to lack of evidence. September 26, 1803, Samuel, alongside a few other criminals, were hanged to death. The ropes being used were capable of holding up to 450 kilograms, meaning that they were way more than capable of strangling a human to death. However, as the other criminals were dying by strangulation, Samuel's rope snapped and he dropped to his feet.
Yeah, but wait.
Now that one is a little hard to explain. The executioner quickly got another rope ready, capable of holding another 450 kilograms, and placed it around his neck again. He put Samuel up, but immediately when he drove the cart beneath his feet away, the noose loosened and Samuel fell to the ground again. Ooh, the executioner
Why? I swear this should just work. The other ones didn't snap, so why is his just snapping?
was confused. He knew he fastened it tight, so what the heck was going on? At this point, Sam suffered a sprained ankle from dropping to the ground and was in serious pain. But again, the executioner very quickly readied another rope,
Oh my god.
ordered the cart driven back, forced Samuel onto it, fastened the noose around his neck, secured it very carefully and tightly, and then ordered that cart to drive away. The crowd witnessing his execution got agitated and began cheering for Samuel to be released. And as they cheered on, that rope failed for the third time, dropping Samuel to the ground. The crowd got violent.
Wait, hold on.
For the third time, dropping
So they're there, yeah. People are up there. How high?
Samuel to the ground. The crowd
Hang
got violent, and the chief policeman in charge had to give an order for his execution to be delayed till the governor arrived. The governor was then summoned to the scene, and upon inspection of the ropes, which showed no evidence of having been cut, and the other criminals already dead at that point with the same rope, he agreed with the crowd
How?
that it was probably a sign from God that Joseph Samuel hadn't committed any crime deserving of execution, and his sentence was commuted to life imprisonment.
Well.
And number 1, Wenceslao Miguel. It's only right to end the video with one case that'll leave you clinging to the edge of your seat. Born on November 1st, 1896, Miguel was a Mexican soldier under Army General Francisco Pancho Villa. However, after the start of the Mexican Revolution, Miguel was captured and sentenced to death by firing squad.
Oh.
Being shot by a squad is one of the most brutal ways a convict can be executed, but somehow, Miguel survived.
How? They're soldiers shooting you with shotguns, yeah, or whatever they have. Like 5. How you? That's like what?
During that execution, he received 8 to 9 gunshots to his body, and then received the coup de grace, or one final shot to the head, at point-blank range to ensure his death. After it was over, Miguel realized he was still alive, but decided to play dead. just so he wouldn't be shot again.
How?
When his body was brought down, Miguel crawled through the night to the church of St. James Apostle, 3 blocks away, where a member of the church found him and took him home until he recuperated. He may have been permanently scarred and disfigured, but he survived that execution.
How? Anyway, YouTube, that's what I'm gonna. This one. I hope you enjoyed. As always, peace.